Hi everyone, Emma here. Welcome to Unapologetically Mum. So today I want to talk about supported living and the Real Tenancy Test. So this is something I learnt about this year as we were going through finding housing for my daughter after her relocation to Northumberland. And before that, she had lived in Surrey, and she lived with me, and in her early 20s, she wanted to live independent of me, and we lived in Surrey at the time, and she moved into supported living, and she lived there, not in the same house, but in supported living in Surrey for, I don't know, something like 9-10 years, something like that. And so it's only this year that I learned about the Real Tenancy Test, which just kind of threw everything on its head, because then I realised that actually her supported living placements wouldn't have passed the Real Tenancy Test. And I suspect that the majority of supported living placements do not pass the Real Tenancy Test. Now, I suspect it, I don't know it. I just have a sneaky suspicion because of the way things are. So I just want to go through that today. I'm not an expert on housing. This is the beginning, so that you can go and do your own research around the Real Tenancy Test, and whether your person who's living in supported living or thinking about supported living, does have a true and real tenancy. Now, the reason why it's important, it's like the legalities, the nuts and bolts of the legalities, and them having a safe tenancy. Of course, that is important. But one of the things that I think is super important, why it's important to make sure that you do have a real tenancy, is because it's it does enforce better quality care, and to get all of the power dynamics in the right orders, so that in supported living, people can feel that it's not really their home, it is where they live, but it isn't necessarily a home that they have control over, that they feel is their home, and that they can say what happens in it and have rights. I know that my daughter very much felt that, she stayed there and that was where she lived, but I don't think she necessarily felt it was her home in the sense that she had autonomy and power to choose, and there was a few things that happened in her supported living placements that actually kind of created a power dynamic that meant that the carers that were there had the power, which was really unfortunate. I might talk about that, or I might save that for a bit later. So I'm just gonna pause here and bring up a graphic of the Real Tenancy, and I'll also put the URL to the website for it so that you can go have a look at it. So just bear with me 1 second. Okay, so this is the Real Tenancy Test PDF, and we'll drop the link, as I said, to it in the description. So I just want to go down to this here. So here we have this graphic. So the Real Tenancy Test, tenancy rights in supported living. A tenancy agreement is in place. The tenant has control over where they live. The tenant has control over who they live with. The tenant has control over who supports them and how they are supported. And the tenant has control over what happens in their home. Now, I want to just go through this a bit quickly, the things I know and we experienced in the supported living placement my daughter was in, and what these kind of mean. So there is a tenancy agreement in place. So if your person is thinking about going into supported living, or is in supported living, then there should be a tenancy agreement in place that you can have a look at, that you've agreed to, signed. So the tenant has control over where they live. Now this is important. So did social services, you agreed with social services, or your person agreed that they wanted to be in supported living, did they have control over where that was? Could they say where they wanted to live and where that was, and they had a say? Or did they just get put somewhere with no control or say about where they live? So what might happen is they have, what do they call them? It's a horrible word, but in their land, in service land, I think they call it voids. They don't call it homes. They don't call it homes, home vacancies, they call it voids. So voids in homes. So like, my daughter was in a supported living placement, and there should have been like 3 people there, but she was the only person there, and so they had 2 voids, and they would look at what voids there are and what's the so if somebody comes up and says they want to go into supported living, they will use their internal brokerage system to see what voids they have, which is just ridiculous terminology. And the language is important because it's not what homes are available. It's, and humanize things. And I think the language, when we dehumanize language, it means we can treat people not very nicely and not and make it different to our own lives. You would never say, oh, I have a void in my home, like for people like flat sharing or whatever, or getting a lodger or something. I have a void in my home. It's got a room to rent, or, looking for people to share a home with. It's ridiculous. Anyway, so, do they get control over where they live? So that's sort of test 1 or gate 1, or 2, sorry. And then 3, the tenant has control over who they live with. So this is another big thing, when my daughter moved in, she was the first one. So what had happened is she lived in one place with in supported living with the care company that she was with, and that house closed down, and so she waited for another house to become available from them. She came to live back with me, and she waited for them to get another house because she wanted to stay with the care company, which again, when we get to the next bit, will be a big discussion point. But that's what she wanted to do at the time. And so she was the first person to go into that place. Now, when they looked to put other people into the place, did my daughter have a say in who that was? And I would say that technically you could say, yeah, she did. But however, I don't really think she did. Like the person came to look around the place. My daughter was consulted, what do you think about this person moving in? Blah, blah, blah. But it's like, did she get a real choice actually? What if she just said no? She didn't say no because I don't think she really felt that she could say no in a way, and plus she didn't really know the person. There wasn't enough time to get to know the person to make that real choice and decision. And And did she have the tools, the confidence to actually say no? Was she really given those choices? Was she told that she could say no and that it was absolutely okay and that she had that power? And I don't really think they do a lot to make to give that power, to make sure that people do know that they have the right to say no. And I like I said, I don't know what would have happened. I really don't. If she'd have gone, no, absolutely not. I don't want to live with this person. So, you know, there's kind of sort of like, in theory, yes, they did ask her. And in theory, yes, she said this person can live there. But I think it's dodgy. So, and what's it? So over who they live with. So, and also like, I think we'll go to that one on number 5. So we'll move on. The tenant has control over who supports them and how they are supported. And this is where I think the majority of supported living won't fall under the real tenancy, because in the situation my daughter was in, it was a little bit complicated. I don't know if it's easier with other companies, but the people she was supported by were called county care. Now, they weren't the landlord. They were the care company that supported her. Sorry, not county care. Voyage care. She was also supported by county care, but in that house, it was voyage care. The landlord was a different company, and it was a couple of companies, and I think the final one was called New Walk, and I can't remember what it was when she first moved in there. Oh, it was Best Housing. So they were the landlord, and her tenancy was with them. Now, it's strange because like the tenancy has a thing in it that says that the tenancy kind of is linked with care. So instantly, is that a true tenancy? A real tenancy? Would that pass the real tenancy test? And then all the people that moved into the house had support from Voyage Care. So it was a 24-hour support package. And Voyage Care provided that 24-hour support. Now, my daughter also had support from a company called County Care, that she went to some activities with, that did some one-to-one work with her, and not all her support was with that same company. However, what would have happened had she said, I don't want to have 24-hour support from Voyage Care? You know, because what happened was like the 24-hour support is 1 to 3. I think it's that way around. 1 support worker to 3 people that need the support. So they share that provision between them for the 24-hour support. And then each person in their support plan also had 1-to-1 provision, which they could, in theory, have with Voyage Care or with another care company. But what would have happened if my daughter had said, I don't want my 24-hour support to be with Voyage Care. I want another support provider. Now, she wouldn't have been able to do it.
like they would have said no, or that she'll have to move out. And this is where it wouldn't have passed this real tenancy, because she wouldn't have had control over who supported her, because the package and is that they shared that 24-hour support. So like nobody in that particular house needed a support worker to be awake during the night. So it was so there was just one support worker there during the night. In the day it was different, because like there was always one support worker there, apart from this other situation, which I think I'll tell you about in another video anyway, but just to add another complexity. But there was one support worker there all the time, 24 hours, although there wasn't, but anyway, in theory, that they all shared. And social services, that's a way for social services to bring that cost down. So it wasn't a real tenancy in that regard. And then number 5, the tenant has control over what happens in their home. And we found this not to be true. She didn't really have control over what happened in her home. The care company controlled a lot of things. Other people, the other tenants, there was lots of things that she didn't like that happened. A quick example was so over COVID, say, in actual fact, my daughter came to live with us over COVID, which I'm really super happy about, because when COVID first hit, then supported living placements were treated as care homes, and no one was allowed in and no one was allowed out, which was actually a breach of their tenancy, because they didn't have control over what happened in their home. Now, that was like weird times, as we all know. Loads of weird things happened and people's rights were crushed all over the place. But in that thing, it wasn't a real tenancy, because other people with the same tenancy and the same housing rights were not locked in their homes. People in care homes, which was very different, their tenancy is very, very different, got locked in their homes. But actually, under their tenancy, nobody really had a right to do that. But it did happen. They did change that as the months went on. Supported living placements became under a different umbrella to care homes, but it did take a good long time for that to get sorted. So these are the simple 5 things. So I just want to show you something else. Bear with me. Okay, so here we are. So it was the 5 key standards. So they're the 5 key standards. And then there is 11 key questions to determine whether the tenancy is genuine, and gives guidance to ensure that the tenants have real tenancy rights. And so, just quickly, has a tenant been moved from their home because of a decision by the support provider or commissioner? Has anyone been placed in the home without consultation with existing tenants because the support provider needed to fill a vacancy? Did the tenant have no other choices when moving into their home? Is there a tenant who wants to move on but's not getting supported to do it? Has a tenant moved into the house without consultation with tenants? Is there a tenant that is clearly unhappy living with another tenant? My daughter was in this situation. She didn't really like living with one of the people that was there, but she couldn't do anything about it. That person was there, and that person also has the rights. You can't just kick everyone out. So it's really quite a strange thing. Is a tenant expected to move if their support needs change? Good question. If my daughter didn't really need 24 hours supported living, clearly she doesn't, because now she lives in her own place. She's not assessed to have needing 24-hour supported living. She doesn't get nighttime support. She clearly didn't need that. So her support needs did change, and she couldn't reduce that support because the other people in the house needed that. So she would have had to have moved out and lost her home. Is support provided at times prescribed by the support provider rather than the tenant? Are tenants having a restricted access to any part of their home other than co-tenant's private space? And so when my daughter first moved into her supported living, there was an office, a locked office that she did not have access to. So, and also, is there equipment such as telephone lines, office equipment, files owned by the housing or support provider? You know, there were files in the house. There was office equipment, like a printer, office equipment in the house. You know, not really what should be in somebody's home. Get your own office. Do the landlord or support provider staff have free access and hold keys to the tenant's home? They do have free access, really, you know. I don't know. I mean, my daughter was, she had keys and could come and go. The other folk that lived in there, they were not able to leave the house on their own without a support person because of their capacity and their safety. So their care needs said that they, you know, they couldn't just walk out of their house. And so, you know, yeah, I don't know. People did have free access. I don't know whether they held keys. I don't know who held keys, actually. So these key questions will enable landlords and support providers to identify whether a tenancy is genuine or not. If the answer to any of these questions is yes, then it's possible that arrangements are either breaking the law or best practice in relation to tenancies, and we strongly recommend that people undertake more detailed investigations to consider the action they need to take. So I think I'm going to leave it there. It's already probably been quite long. So let me just take this down a moment. Okay, so I hope that's helped. You can obviously go and research this for yourselves and have a look into it because, like I said, my daughter lived in supported living for, I think, 10 plus years. And I had no clue about this. I did not know her rights were not being upheld, or that she even had those rights, to be honest. And actually, it's really clear now that she is living in her own place. The shift in her, in terms of her knowing that is her house and her being able to make the decisions for herself about who enters her front door, what she does in her home, how she wants her home to look, you know, and has really helped her to address it being a home rather than somewhere where she lives. And the other thing is that she was in supported living, and I think some people think it's secure, but actually she had to move. So her first placement closed down, and due to them not being able to fill those voids, those spaces, and then they opened another one in a different location, and you know, she didn't have to go with them. She did choose to wait and go with that company, and then that closed down. So she was evicted kind of twice when she didn't want to be, and the most recent is what spurred the relocation. And what happened in that situation was, like, the care company, you know, it's kind of like awkward because, like, the care company wanted to have some supporting living placements, and so they then worked alongside with social landlords like Best and Newark, who then found a private rented property. So just on the open market, a private rented property. Now, you know, the person that owned that property, so there was like the landlord, you know, so it was like kind of like sublet. So there was the owner of the house who let the property to, say, Best or Newark, and then Newark or Best became the landlord. But the owner of the property wanted to sell the property, so they had no choice but to, you know, they can't stop that. So they were given notice, and then subsequently my daughter was served a Section 21, which is a no-fault eviction, because the house was being sold and they had to move out. So she was given 2 months notice to move out of a house she didn't want to move out of. She didn't want to leave. And so it wasn't secure. And so then when we moved up here, when she made the decision to move up here, you know, she was very clear that she wanted to live in her own place. She didn't want to share. Now, Northumberland County Council don't have actually any vacancies. They don't have like that. They had supported living placements in shared accommodation. She didn't want to live with anybody, and she has the right to say that. And therefore they didn't have anywhere for her to live that met what she wanted. And even if she had have said, okay, I'll go into shared accommodation, supported living in a shared house, actually she wouldn't have been able to have one of those houses near us, because they don't have any. They don't have provision in our village, or actually anywhere near our village. So she would have had to have lived away from family to get that support. So this is why we went with the going and getting a house via social housing, via the housing association and the home finder, and all that bought, which was not easy actually, but did end up with a good result of her living in the same village we live in her own flat. You know, at the moment she's got a starter tenancy, as with all people that get their first house, and then after a year they move on to a I think it's called a secure tenancy, which basically means that she, you know, can live in that house for as long as she wants to live in that house, and they can't chuck her out. She can't get served a Section 21 or anything like that, you know. And the only way she can get chucked out is if she does something wrong and voids her tenancy. You know, is a nuisance or doesn't pay the rent, or, you know, whatever. And so now I'm very, very happy that she has a secure home that is a true home with a real tenancy. Let me know in the comments what your experience of that is. Are you having to make a choice about whether your person goes into supported living? Do you know your rights? Did you even know this existed? This is what I want to know. I don't think people do know. I don't think people are being told when, like, you know, when your person says, oh, you know, they want to go into independent living, supported living. I don't think they're told about the Real Tenancy Test. They're not. I know they're not. Unless you're with a super good company. But knowing the state of things, I think it's unlikely. But let me know your experience, good and bad. I'll be glad to hear. And like I said, I'll put all the links down in the description. So see you soon. Bye for now.